A roughly 10 square kilometer stretch of the Kursk region has become a graveyard for Russian military hardware, a harbinger of disaster to come for the Kremlin as its offensive in Ukraine begins to falter, Forbes reports. Kriegsforscher, a drone operator with the Ukrainian Marine Brigade, counted about 90 destroyed and abandoned Russian vehicles in his roughly 5 square kilometer area alone. This is equipment for a whole brigade. Ukrainian losses in this same section were significantly less, only about 20 units. The 4-to-1 loss ratio in Ukraine's favor is not unusual. In fact, it is only slightly higher than the overall 3.1 loss ratio for the entire war. 14,500 Russian vehicles destroyed versus 5,200 Ukrainian ones. A year after Ukraine's counteroffensive in the summer of 2023 ended and Russia launched its new offensive, Kursk has become the epicenter of the fighting, although fierce fighting also continues in the areas of Chasovy Yar, Toretsk, Vovchansk, Kurakhovo, Ugledar and other cities and towns in eastern Ukraine. Putin has given his forces until February to drive Ukrainian forces out of Kursk, and for good reason. The Russian regime expects the inauguration of the US President-elect Donald Trump on January the 20th to usher in a new and unstable era in US relations with Ukraine. Some of Trump's closest advisors have openly despised Ukraine. When Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenski emphasized Ukraine's independence in a social media post on November the 16th, billionaire Elon Musk mocked Zelensky for his sense of humor. Whatever happens after January the 20th, Putin seeks complete control over Russian territory when the political situation changes. So the Kremlin assembled 60,000 Russian and North Korean troops and the best heavy weapons in the Kursk region and began to throw them into the offensive. The first wave of Russian attacks encountered Ukrainian mines, drones, tanks and artillery near the village of Zelenski. By the end of November, the attacks slowed, but only long enough for units to receive reinforcements. This is just a warm-up for the show, Kriegsforscher noted on November the 29th. The second wave of attacks began on Saturday. It was also unsuccessful. The Kriegsforscher drone team said it had shot down 10 Russian aircraft. The human toll was equally high. The Russians were losing between 1,200 and 2,000 troops killed and wounded each day, far outpacing the roughly 30,000 troops they were mobilizing each month. Without North Korean reinforcements, the Russian army would be shrinking by thousands each week. I personally view these successes as largely a failure of the Russian military. The way Russia uses its forces is unsustainable. Analyst Andrew Perpetua wrote, "While it is difficult to predict when and how the Russian field armies in Kursk and eastern Ukraine will collapse, it is clear that they are heading that way. If anything could change the situation in Russia's favor, it would be the end of US aid to Ukraine. Kiev is trying to increase military recruitment, bolster its defenses, reform its command structures, and expand its weapons production." Despite these difficulties, Ukrainians have reason to be optimistic. Western aid can continue to flow, albeit on new terms. Meanwhile, the Russians continue to lose resources that they can no longer replace.
Russia will struggle to replace the increasing numbers of troops lost to death and injury on the front line if the West continues to back Ukraine, a U.S. think tank said. The Business Insider reported this. It is noted that the Russian military in November suffered record casualties, with around 1,500 troops killed or injured daily, as it pushed back the Ukrainian military in East Ukraine and Kursk Oblast, according to UK military intelligence. The figures from the UK's Ministry of Defence said that Russia suffered 45,690 casualties in November, the fourth consecutive month in which its casualties have increased. The Institute for the Study of War said that the staggeringly high cost of deaths and injuries isn't sustainable. Russia's constrained labor pool is likely unable to sustain this increased casualty rate in the medium term, and continued Western military support for Ukraine remains vital to Ukraine's ability to inflict losses at this rate, said the analysts in their daily update on the progress of the war. Petro Chernik, a Ukrainian military observer, told Army-Inform that Russia has boosted its recruitment rates to around 42,000 a month. However, it will need to increase that to 50,000 a month if it is to continue its advances in Donetsk, sustaining its current casualty rates. At the same time, Russia is suffering an acute domestic workforce shortage. Reuters reported in November that increasing numbers of workers are being pulled into Russia's growing defense sector, meaning that swaths of the economy are struggling to find staff. High inflation and sanctions are compounding Russia's economic woes. The Kremlin is offsetting its high losses in Ukraine by offering recruits relatively lucrative contracts and boosting ranks with prisoners and foreign fighters. But Russia can't both replace its troops lost in Ukraine and solve its workforce crisis, said the ISW. Russians can either serve in uniform in Ukraine or work in Russia's domestic economy, but they cannot do both simultaneously, its analysts said. Weapons from Western allies have been vital in enabling Ukraine to inflict massive casualty rates on Russia, even as severe manpower shortages of its own mean that it's struggling to hold off intensifying Russian attacks. Russia has also been sending troops into head-on, high-casualty attacks, known as human wave or meat grinder attacks, which have contributed to a high casualty count. Military bridging operations are playing a crucial role in shaping battle lines between Russian and Ukrainian forces this winter, as both sides face significant challenges from Ukraine's rivers, which act as natural barriers to heavy military vehicles, Forbes wrote. Russia has intensified its offensive operations over the past months to secure additional territory before potential peace talks after U.S. President-elect Donald Trump takes office in January. According to Forbes, Russian forces have reportedly established a company-sized bridgehead over the Oskil River in the Masyutivka-Zapadin area in eastern Kharkiv Oblast. Forbes notes that the Oskil River has been a key obstacle preventing Russian forces from capturing Kupiansk, a strategic hub for railways and highways. However, no reports indicate the construction of a bridge capable of supporting assault vehicles, and some sources suggest the bridgehead has already been destroyed. The Dnipro River remains contested in southern Ukraine, with Russia controlling the east bank and Ukraine holding the west bank following Russia's withdrawal from Kherson. Forbes reports that despite Ukraine establishing a bridgehead on the eastern bank last year, they couldn't construct a bridge and eventually abandoned the position. Russian forces are now attempting to control islands in the Dnipro River mouth to establish fortified positions for a potential west bank bridgehead. Forbes says that Russian forces have destroyed bridges near Tymanovikai and Karpovichi in northern Chernihiv Oblast near the Ukraine-Russia-Belarus border. Both sides utilize Soviet-era equipment including MTU-72 assault bridges and PMP floating bridges. Russia has upgraded these systems with the MTU-90 and PP-2005 pontoon bridge, while Ukraine has received various bridge systems through foreign aid from Germany and the United States. According to Forbes, both sides face personnel challenges, with bridging units suffering heavy losses and likely operating with inadequately trained soldiers. Ukraine maintains a slight defensive advantage through its drone and electronic warfare capabilities, which can disrupt Russian river crossing efforts. Inadequate training can lead to failures, as demonstrated by Russia's attempt to cross the Siversky Donets River in May 2022, when an entire battalion tactical group was destroyed. Over the course of the war, bridging units on both sides have sustained heavy losses and are likely staffed with soldiers lacking adequate training. However, Ukraine holds a slight defensive advantage due to its strengths in drone and electronic warfare technologies, which can disrupt Russian river crossing efforts.